process for any new skill is hard enough for a neurotypical learner, let alone a child who has a deficit in the brain processes required for these tasks. Which leads me to my next point, kids with processing disorders. So, number 3, things to remember when you are working with neurodiverse kiddos, give the gift of time. A neurodiverse athlete or learner will often have difficulty in any one of the steps required to encode, store, or retrieve information. Often, upon hearing verbal instructions, students with processing issues require time for the auditory input to reach their brain. I think of this as that swirling circle you see when you type information into Google and you're waiting for it to load. You have to give your neurodiverse athletes more time than you would normally give your neurotypical athletes when you give instructions. If you're working in a group setting, give the instruction using only a few chunks of information. Remember, short instructions. Then send your neurotypical athletes out first to practice the skill. When they're gone, use the time with your neurodiverse kiddos to check for understanding. You can ask them to repeat what you said, and if you detect that they're having a difficulty, you can repeat, rephrase, or reform your instructions. You can perhaps draw a picture. You can demonstrate the skill yourself while stressing the cue words. Even more helpful would be pictures of the instructions posted for them to refer to when necessary. Too often, I see coaches blaming kiddos for not paying attention or not caring, when really they just don't understand the given instructions. Remember, a child will do well if they can. If they cannot, it is our job to help them to do well. Talking louder and repeating the same instruction to your athlete when they struggle to understand it the first time will not help. It only creates anxiety and frustration in the learner. I heard a brilliant analogy of this from the Leaky Brakes Brake Shop webinar offered from the Child and Parent Resource Institute in London, Ontario. I highly stress you check them out because it will change the way you think about kids with impulse control problems. So, here's the analogy. Imagine you have a beautiful sports car. I mean, this car is the top of the line. It can drive faster than any other car in the road. This is a high-performance piece of machinery. Now imagine there's a leak in the brake line of this amazing car. This car simply cannot stop when it needs to. You put your foot on the brake, can't stop. There's a leak. So, will yelling and screaming at the car and repeating, "Stop, stop, stop, stop," help the car to stop? Will threatening to take away the best oil from the car if the car doesn't stop help the car to stop? Identifying that there is a problem with the brake line, that the car is physically unable to stop at this time, and figuring out how to fix the brake line is how you fix the problem. We have to change how we approach and work with these kids, realizing that we cannot have the same expectations from them as we have from neurotypical kids. And we absolutely cannot use the same language, motivation, or discipline techniques with our neurodiverse athletes as we do with our neurotypical athletes. It just doesn't work. Number 4 thing to think about when you work with neurotypical athletes. You are going to have to help them prioritize. Often, athletes who seem to not give their best effort in a task, they're not procrastinating out of disinterest. They're not sure how to begin. Many neurodiverse athletes have deficits with executive functioning, which impedes how they access information to complete tasks. Think about it. In order to complete a task, We must be able to organize our thoughts enough to pick a beginning point. This involves prioritizing the elements of the task, picking the most important to complete first, then organizing each subsequent element of a task in sequence, and finally accomplishing the appropriate portion last. That's a lot of steps that we do on the daily, and our brain has to do with every task we accomplish. This act of determining which elements of a skill must be practiced or completed first is sometimes the biggest obstacle to a neurodiverse athlete as they attempt to learn new skills and incorporate instructions. In order to help, first, again, keep instructions short. Repeat them as many times as necessary for the athlete to remember. Where you might teach a skill with the whole part whole approach for a neurotypical athlete, when it comes to dealing with students who think differently, you must parse your instructions down even more. Lower your expectations with regard to the time it takes to learn new tasks, and break skills down into chunks involving only 2 chunks of information or physical actions at a time. Next, give your instructions using this phrase: first, then. Giving instructions in this format helps neurodiverse kiddos pick the most important step to begin with, and then the next step to do after they have accomplished the first. So, first I want you to set up the jump, then I want you to do a 3-turn. Whatever you need to put there. Keep it short. This gives these kiddos a clear path to learning the skill with much less use of brain power on their part, allowing them more enjoyment in the learning process itself. I also highly recommend writing these instructions down where they are easily accessible, such as laminated lists that you can reuse daily, or having instructions posted where neurodiverse learners can see them, which helps them when they lose focus and becoming distracted. Studies have also shown that taking a picture of the student themselves performing that task so they can look at themselves doing it seems to help elicit the best response. Number 5, dial it down. Many student athletes have sensory processing disorders, which deals with the way a body receives and processes sensory information from the outside world. Children that have sensory issues often experience stimuli more strongly than others, and things like loud noises or bright lights can be painful for them. If you know or suspect that an athlete may have sensory issues, you might want to adapt their learning environment, choosing times when there's less stimuli, less people, and less noise for your lessons. If you're teaching a sport in an environment that requires music, then watch the volume of the music and make sure to modify it if it causes issues for the athlete in question. Teaching group lessons with students who struggle with distraction may be difficult. However, kids that struggle with social cues learn so much about how to interact with their peers when they're working with a group of friends toward a common goal and under the guidance of an instructor. So I recommend a balance of group lessons for work on social skills and private lessons for intensive skill work in order to bring the best benefit for your neurodiverse athletes. But remember, every neurodiverse kiddo is different, so trust your instinct for what you feel will work best for you, and for them, I should say. From taste, touch, pressure, sight, and hearing, be prepared for your neurodiverse athletes to exhibit sensitivity in any of these areas, and work to lessen the discomfort so they can train free of distractions. The number 6 thing to think about when working with neurodiverse kiddos: they have delayed development. All coaches have received training concerning the difference between chronological age, which is your age in years, and developmental age, which is where you are in your level of maturity. When working with neurodiverse children, it is important to remember 2 things. First, it is very common to see delayed development in kiddos that have hidden disabilities, like ADHD or ASD. Children can often lag behind several years from their counterparts. This means that while you might be teaching a student who looks 12, he or she may be up to 3 years behind their counterparts in not only physical, but also social or emotional development. As coaches, we have to recognize this lag and adjust our expectations on everything from emotional control to reading social cues. Second, development in children with hidden disabilities and issues is often asynchronous, particularly in children with multiple special needs, where we often use the term twice exceptional. Asynchronous means that you could be dealing with a gifted 8-year-old child who knows more than you about the Canadian political system, yet struggles to grasp basic time management each practice, and also may have the emotional control of a 6-year-old. Different abilities will develop at different rates. You need to be prepared to meet your neurodiverse athlete at all of these levels in order to best engage them as they learn. Number 7, the 7th thing to think about as you work with neurodiverse kiddos, you're going to have to embrace anxiety. This sounds funny, I know. After all, who wants to embrace anxiety? What I mean is, as a coach, you have to realize that anxiety goes hand in hand with neurodiversity. Children who suffer with invisible disabilities often know they are different before they are even diagnosed. They know things are harder for them, and they feel shame and anxiety about not fitting in. Often anxiety will show up as perfectionism, negative self-talk, crying, or reluctance to practice. Even more often, the anxiety about failure or being different will manifest in stomach aches, headaches, aches and pains, and meltdowns. It's important that if you have a child athlete that exhibits these symptoms often, and all possible physical causes are ruled out, then you are likely looking at a physical expression of their psychological turmoil. It's easy to accuse these kiddos of making excuses because in neurotypical athletes, someone that makes excuses over and over, usually there's something going on or they don't want to be there. But with neurotypical kiddos, you can't, okay? They're not trying to get out of anything. They didn't ask for this. Instead, you need to do what you can to alleviate their anxiety. Help them name their fears. If they can't express how they are feeling, then they can't address how to control those feelings. Once your neurodiverse athletes have named their fears, don't discount them or issue the typical "stop worrying" advice that we so often hear. While it is important to recognize your students' anxiety, it is equally important to not try to fix it or tell them to stop worrying. Doing this invalidates your athlete's feelings. After all, they are allowed to feel what they feel. Instead, start teaching mindfulness, growth mindset, and relaxation strategies early and often. And then practice, practice, practice. There are some amazing apps on the iPad that I use for my daughter, like Stop and Breathe Kids. You name it, they're amazing. So I highly recommend looking up some things that you can use. There's so much technology out there. I can't stress this enough. As a coach of neurodiverse athletes, you must stay on top of their mental training. It will be as important as their physical training. Once you have the basis of these strategies, stress to your athlete that anxiety is natural and they have the tools to cope with it, and you have faith that they can do it. Anxiety is a tricky monster for neurodiverse athletes, but it can be controlled with consistent effort from them and constant support from you, their coach. The eighth thing to think about when you work with neurodiverse athletes: change your thinking. I know, you're going to have to do a lot of work with your thinking. As coaches, we have this belief about what it takes for kids to be coachable. We've all seen these memes we circulate on Facebook. Hell, I've even circulated some of them. I know you all know the ones I'm referring to. Memes that start like this: 10 things that have or require zero talent. Being on time, which is 10 times harder for kids with executive function issues. Work ethic, which is hard for kids with ADHD or ASD that are prone to distraction, which is often mistaken for laziness. Effort. Often neurodiverse kids are so riddled with anxiety they give up, or they don't even know where to begin due to executive functioning or processing issues. I hope you are all starting to see what I'm talking about here. It's time to stop posting these motivational memes. We need to stop applying these neurotypical expectations to our neurodiverse athletes, because they shame those athletes for which those behaviors are 10 times harder. We have to adjust our expectation when teaching kiddos that think differently. What this means is you have to stop asking them to look you in the eye when you're talking to them, because often this makes it harder for neurodiverse kiddos to focus. You need to stop asking them to stand up straight and stop fidgeting when you're explaining a task to them. Many kiddos have balance or coordination issues that require them to lean on something for support. And some have chemical imbalances that make it next to impossible to not fidget. Stop asking kiddos to stand in line and wait their turn. Let's be honest, aside from just poor coaching, yes, I said it, asking neurodiverse children to stand in formation and do nothing but wait their turn is not realistic and sets them up for failure. As coaches, we need to change our beliefs about how we teach our students and what we expect from them. There are more neurodiverse athletes out there than we realize, and we simply haven't adapted our teaching techniques to accommodate their needs. It's time we let go of outdated practices and started really exploring how to best help this underserved population of athletes. Sports can be a lifesaver for kids struggling with invisible disabilities. Following these simple tips can change lives for the better, both yours and your students. So, let me know if you're a coach that works with neurodiverse athletes or the parent of a neurodiverse kiddo. What have I missed? We can learn from each other. If you have any tips for teaching and supporting neurodiverse athletes, feel free to share in the comments. And please like and share. I hope to see you soon. Bye.